In this video, I'm going to tell you about why it's a bad idea to give up too soon in wargaming. This has happened to me countless times, which is to say, I've never counted how many times that it happened, but it's happened a bunch of times. You start to play a game and you think things are going to go pretty well, you know, whether it's a tournament, whether it's just a fun game at the shop, a pickup game with your friend in your game room, basement, garage, wherever it is you play, and you start to play, let's say it's X-Wing, okay? And you start to play and you lose an important ship, a ship that, frankly, your strategy sort of hinged on as far as this particular build is concerned, and you lose it right away, maybe in the first turn or in the second turn. And if you're anything like me, in the past, many, many times, the first thought that goes through your head is like, well, this was a short game. And the reason that you're thinking that is because your belief is that the game's already over. You know, the way that you had things figured out, the strategy you had has failed when meeting the enemy, and it's already done. You're over. It's done. Now, every once in a while, this is true. Sometimes, just you're going to have bad dice the entire time, because you can't mitigate the dice, but you can mitigate your list, and maybe your list doesn't take that very well, or whatever the problem is. But the fact is that sometimes you do lose. We all do. But sometimes, and this has happened to me, again, countless times, because I didn't count them, but it's been enough times that I wanted to make a video about it. I can't tell you how many times I have thought to myself, well, this will be a short game, and then I end up winning. In any kind of modern, balanced wargaming system, a system where there's points and, each side is supposed to be balanced in power or whatever that means, generally, you will have games that are kind of close. And frankly, sometimes they can swing wildly from turn to turn to turn. It can look like, when this really crucial piece was taken out right away very early, well, that's it for me. And you can give up sometimes. But you shouldn't, because a lot of times that sort of loss on your part, let's say, can signal something to your opponent, and then they can get overconfident and think, well, I've already got this one now because I took out their such and such fighter or whatever. And so I don't have to concern myself with this or this or this. And that can sometimes come back and bite them in the behind in later turns. And then maybe a couple of kind of iffy dice rolls, maybe some bad plays, all that kind of stuff. And then you end up on the victorious side. The thing is that, again, like I said, these games being relatively balanced, they can kind of flip back and forth. And if they're designed well, it should be a close game. So just because something happens to you right up front, don't immediately think, well, this is it for me. The game, I've had players be like, well, like when something happens real quick, right in the beginning, that's bad for them. They're like, okay, so you want to start over? You want to do another game? And like, you won this one. And I'm like, well, maybe I didn't. Let's play on and see. And this is where kind of the problem lies with that kind of mindset besides. Taking out of consideration the fact that maybe you'll win, maybe you won't, whatever. There's also something, again, we're playing a game. Both of us should be having fun. And for many players, it's really not fun when you immediately give up. Like when that thing just goes wrong right from the get-go, and then you go, well, I'm going to lose. I give up. That can kind of bum out your opponent and make the game less fun for them. And as I've talked about in the past, about being that guy, pachow, you always want to try to keep your opponent's enjoyment of the game not foremost in your mind, but right up there, right up near the foremost of your mind, because it's the golden rule. If I'm trying to make the game fun for you and you're trying to make the game fun for me, then we're both having fun, and that's the way that games ought to be. That might have rhymed, I don't know. But the fact is that you have to think about this from the other player's point of view. If you give up right away because you're whatever, space marine machine, whatever, got blown up right off the bat. And that was not what you planned. You planned on taking that all the way to the other side of the board and sitting in their deployment zone or taking over their asteroid or Candyland. I don't know what happens in that game, but any of these things break your initial strategy if you just go, well, and just have this defeatist attitude and give up. That's not necessarily making the other player feel good. And it's also, like I said, kind of shortchanging yourself because it's not the end of the game. Even sometimes when it sort of is. I have been in situations before where I have been seriously outgunned. That first whatever unit dies much quicker than I thought it was going to. And I'm like, all right. And there's part of me that's, basically just jumping off the cliff. But then there's a part of me that's like, all right, I can still pull this out. And then the next big bad thing happens to me. And then I make some big mistake because I'm flustered from those two previous things. And now I'm really behind the 8 ball. And the question is, at which point do you decide, okay, well, this was fun. Why don't we start another game and try it again or something like that? You can do that. Or sometimes you can kind of almost make a narrative out of it. You can say, okay, I'm not going to win, but I am definitely taking your commander in the blue pants there. That guy's going to die. That's happening. There's nothing you can do to stop me. And then they'll be like, well, let's see. And then that's the fun part. Now, if it's a tournament and you're doing it for points or money or love or glory or whatever, okay, fine, that's a different story. But when you're just having fun playing a game, kind of looking at it, that you're going to lose, but yeah, I'm going to lose, but that tank I'm going to at least scratch its paint or something like that. Taking that into consideration and having fun with that, that's kind of what makes the game fun, is when you're both having a good time. Now, if a bunch of stuff goes south real quick on your side of the board and your opponent maybe it was just really super lucky dice, or maybe you just made some bad moves, or they made some spectacular moves and had good terrain on their side, or whatever the deal was, maybe sometimes your opponent's like, hey, should we just start over again? Do you want to do that? Another thing that you can also do, and I've done this a bunch of times in smaller games, more skirmishy stuff, because it's sort of difficult, I'll explain. One of the things you can kind of do frequently is be like, well, let's just switch armies. You know what I mean? And in a big army game, that's not going to work out because there's a lot to keep track of and it's difficult. But in a smaller game like Shadespire, let's say, or anything, that's small, skirmishy, you just be like, okay, well, why don't you take my guys and I'll take yours, and then we'll see. In some situations, especially with beginners, if you're playing against a beginner and you start to crush them early, it's always a good idea to be giving them strategy and ideas and say, well, maybe you should try this, or maybe you should replace this unit with this unit, or these guys shouldn't move up so quickly, or anything along those lines. But maybe it's just a situation of like, well, let's just flip around. And then maybe if you show them, well, I can beat you with your army, then they know it's not their army that's broken. They just know that they're new to the game and they're just getting started. So doing those types of things can really help as well. But the real thing is that to not immediately give up. Don't ever give up. I mean, there's a lot of things to be said about just don't give up, but sometimes you have to give up. But in a game where you're having fun and it's a good time, don't just immediately throw in the towel and be a bad sport. Try to keep moving along because, again, like I said, very frequently fortunes change and you end up winning, or maybe you have a good time of just trying to get this one goal. I'm going to take this one objective even if I lose all the rest. And having fun, both players having a good time, that's the whole point of the game.